All right, we are live and we are a technology. It's a beautiful thing. So, welcome to Weekly Momentum. I am your host, Mariana Majef, the Get It Done Diva, and we're here to plan your week together in 4 steps. So, we are going to kick off Weekly Momentum for this week. And what's interesting about this week in particular is that I like to look at things in the grand scheme of things. And this week that we're stepping into right now is halfway through the 90-day cycle that we're in right now. So all of the pieces that I talk about, they're I don't even want to say they're like pieces. They're more like cogs in a bigger wheel, a bigger system. And so the weekly momentum system fits beautifully into the 90-day planning cycle. And of course, the daily momentum is going to create momentum for you to make your weekly momentum even more impactful. So all of these cogs, they work together inside the system. So if you're finding yourself using one of them, then it's time to start to build out your machine a little bit more and start adding in some of the pieces. But we're going to focus today just on weekly momentum, but I will reference a few pieces that are to do with the bigger picture and the 90-day planning as well as the daily stuff as we go along. But we're primarily going to focus today on the weekly momentum. And if you don't have one of my planners, you can grab one of my 90-day planners in my shop, getitdonediva.com. And it's going to walk you through a lot of the pages that I'm going to share with you right now, but you don't need it to follow along. You can simply use a piece of paper or a journal that you have already and fill in the details as we go. So we go through 4 steps in weekly momentum. So the first step is going to be to rewind, to look back over the past week, and then we're going to realign. We're going to line back up with the destination that you're heading to, making sure that everything's on track. Step 3, we're going to plan an awesome week that we're going to step into. And step 4, we're going to plug into it so that it's almost like hitting the go switch. We're going to make sure that we're actually on the right track. And as we get started, is always a good time to look at how you're feeling and take a moment to just look at the emotional thermometer or just ask yourself, how do I feel right now? Because you're going to get out of this process, out of any planning process that you do, what you put into it. And so if you go into a weekly momentum session and you're feeling frustrated or overwhelmed or irritated, then you're going to create a very different weekly plan than you would if you'd gone into the process feeling excited or calm or even just satisfied. You don't have to be off the charts, but it will make an impact with the output that you get. So rewinding is step 1, and the rewind process is simply a collection of questions. And you can see behind me there's 21 questions that I talk about all the time. And they're not complicated questions. They're on the back of every planner, a lot of the tools and the resources and the workbooks that I use all have it on them. And it's pretty remarkable how a simple question can shift how you feel about something, can it unlocks something so that you start to see things differently. And at the core, at the root of every challenge or obstacle or wall that you've been banging your head up against, there's going to be a question that can just evaporate that obstacle completely. And I know you've had moments like that where it's just been you chugging away, wondering, why isn't this working? And then you really lean into the question instead of just using it as a mantra, right? There's a difference between asking a question and actually asking the question. A lot of times we ask questions but we don't really want an answer. How you doing today? That's a great example, right? So many times people ask people, "How are you doing?" But honestly, they don't really want an answer. It's not so not that they don't care, but they're not asking the question because they really, really want an answer. And so when we talk about questions here on Weekly Momentum, and especially in the rewind, these are questions that I've picked out that really begin if you really show up to answer them, not just see go through the motions, that are going to start to unlock some of those solutions that you are going to need to move. Let's think of this as a game to the next level, right? So each week is this opportunity for you to level up to the next week, level up to the next week. And what does that? What unlocks that are questions. I get very excited about questions. And the questions, they're not like these grandiose questions that I have in the planner, or the 21 questions behind me. They're not these huge, with lots of really fancy words in them, or really articulate. They're just really designed to cut to the core. So one of the questions, for example, on the rewind is, what did you put energy into last week? And that question is so great because I think a lot of times we have two paths as we go through each week. We have multiple paths, but let's just talk about two of them. So we have two paths, and one path is that we can go along and we can do the things that are on the list, or we can do the things that come to us. We feel productive. It's the productive path, right? Seemingly. But then there's this other path that's going on in our mind at the same time, that is our expectations. And our expectations don't always line up with the same thing that we're doing or what's happening that week. And when there's this like deviation, it's like two parts of ourselves are being pulled apart, right? We're doing this thing, but we're expecting something else. And sometimes we're aware of this and sometimes we're not. So when you're going through the week and you have that feeling like something's off, it's probably because it's almost like your not your identity, but your energy is scattered like a prism. It's going in a million different directions. And when you really sit down, and a good question will do this, and really focus on what it is that you're doing, and intentionally ask yourself, why am I doing this? What am I expecting to get out of this? What will this create for me? What is the best way to approach this? What is the next action step? Questions like that, remember, right? Really simple questions. It lasers your focus, and then it kind of brings all of those disconnected bits of energy back together, your expectations and the clarity of the task and your motivation, and all of it, lining it up so you create even more momentum. And so when I asked this question, where did your energy go last week? Like, what are the top three things that you put energy into the last 7 days? It's a really great question to start to notice. Has last week been one of those weeks where you had expectations, whether they were intentional or not, and then you had the week that you actually lived, and were they on the same path? And so sometimes when I write down what I put energy into the last week, I begin to see things that have been hijacking my time, or even my mental energy and my mindset. Sometimes we're battling gremlins. I'm going to be honest with you. You know, I wasn't willing to admit it, I don't think, for most of my life, but I'm starting to realize now that I think I'm a little bit depressed, she says, laughing. And I'm not alone. I know that. And it's not anything dramatic most of the time, but I have ups and downs. And life is ups and downs. The challenge is that whether you struggle with a little bit of this or not, When we have downs is typically when, I'm sure it's not just me, I'm not completely crazy, right? That when we have these downs, that's when these voices in our heads start to really start speaking up. I like to call it the itty bitty shitty committee. And when that's happening, it's really hard to focus your energy and stay on point, right? So, as you're looking at the week, you can start to remind yourself as you're rewinding the last week. That's what we're doing in step one of the process here, rewind. We're using questions to rewind the last week so that we can really look at the week that we expected, that we planned, the logical week, what was on our mind when we set the plan the week before. We can compare that with the week that we actually lived, because this is the only way that we can start to create change. If you are not happy with where you are right now, or just, not necessarily in the grand scheme like that, you're slugging away and you've hit a wall and you're at a really difficult part, but if you just want to go in a different direction, or you want to work on a project and you're not, or your business isn't in the place that you want it to be, or you're not happy with the way that you're showing up or you're feeling about your business, anything at all, if you want to change anything at all, it's going to start with you getting really clear and asking questions on what you want and starting to unlock the change that you want to create. It's not just going to happen on its own. What typically happens is the change happens when you ask questions without even needing an answer, but you're willing to lean all into the questions. And we're using a simple one here, like what did I put energy into last week? That's not necessarily a groundbreaking question that's going to reveal this amazing new path, right? But if you trust that all of the questions, there's 7 of them in the weekly rewind, all of them together will actually create some kind of momentum, some chipping away at the challenges that you're having, some kind of like loosening of the fog so that you can start to see the answers, because nobody else can tell you how to create the change. You can go look for answers, and there'll be plenty of people, myself included, saying, hey, this is the best way to do this and this is the best way to do that. But you need to know the answers. You need to be focused on finding your own answers and then finding people to help you implement them. You're going to have much better success with the paths that you take when you do it that way around, rather than expecting the other people or other people's solution to just fix whatever is your challenge. You have to do this work, this rewind work, in order to get really clear and chip away at the fog and the challenges and create the change. So these questions combined, like what do I put energy into last week, right? Behind the scenes, what's happening when you're asking that question is you're looking in black and white at what you had intended to do and what happened and where your energy went the last week, the choices you made, the decisions that you made, how committed you were to the actual things that you said were on your weekly top 10. All of this is being revealed when you start to look at what did you put energy into last week. It blows my mind. How exciting it is that the changes that we can create on our own. You don't need to buy a $100,000 program, or go and do like a retreat where you take ashwagandha or something like that, right? I'm probably saying the wrong name for that, but that's one of the drugs I've actually not taken for my very colorful life. But what I want you to start to realize is that in your hand, right, a pen and a piece of paper is the most powerful way with a question for you to create change. And so this weekly rewind, don't skip it. So easy to just go, Marianne, I just want to do the planning bit. But don't skip the rewind is my message to you. So there's questions on here like the one we highlighted today, which is What did you put energy into? But there is other questions too, like who did you connect with last week? That's really showing you we become the sum total of the people that we hang out the most, right? And so as you start to recognize who did you hang out with, that's going to really help you shift that. How did last week match up with your expectations with your weekly top 10? Using the scoring system with the weekly top 10, when we're doing the rewind, is when you're looking at last week's weekly top 10, you're giving yourself a score out of 10. And that's going to help you look at your expectations and how well and committed you are at creating those to-do lists for the week, right? And then if you could have a do-over, what would you do differently last week? And this is where you try on for emphasize the changes and the ideas and the alternate paths that come up when you ask the question. So all of that is the rewind process. Every week in Weekly Momentum, I go through all 4 steps, but I don't dive into every single piece of them. I wanted to really deep dive into just a few little questions in the overall process of the rewind as we went through today. And in case you're wondering, this is, the scoring. You get 0 if you did not complete an item on your weekly top 10 from last week. You get a half point if you did anything at all towards it, just started it. 1 point if you completed the item on your weekly top 10. And then 2 points. These are just now and again when you really knock something out of the ballpark. So that's how you score your weekly top 10 list. Now, next step is realign. I'm not going to talk too much about that today because I really want to spend the bulk of the rest of the time on your weekly top 10. But the realign step is where you look at the bigger picture. You look at I mentioned at the beginning, your 90-day cycle and your 90-day goals. And you remind yourself the destination where you're heading. Because if we're just planning without the vision of where we're going, it's like driving but just looking down at the road. You're going to crash or you're going to end up in the wrong place. So it's important that we do in step 2, the realign, where we really take a moment to go, well, where am I really going here? This is also a nice time to adjust the destination if you need to. So I'm a big believer in you can change the goal. I know a lot of people say, change the plan, don't change the goal, right? BS. I think that if a lot of times we're doing things because we said we would and we want to feel that we committed to something. And what is the point in achieving a target or a goal that is no longer relevant to you? As you move through the year, for example, the annual goals or the targets or the vision that you had for the year in January, as you move through the year, you receive new information, which gives you better knowledge to see how to get where you want to get to, or even where you want to get to. What my point here is that in July, you might not want the same things that you wanted in January. So why would you continue to just don't change the goal, don't change the target? No. If you need to change the goal, whether it's your annual goals or your 90-day target or even your weekly goal on Thursday, change it. You're way better off having a plan. Weekly top 10 is literally a plan for the week that you are excited and is moving you in the right direction. Because if you're just saying, don't change the goal, then you're not going to look at the plan. You're not invested. You know it's BS and you're just going through the motions. So in the realign step is where you have full permission if you want to go ahead and, change it if you want to. And then we move into step 3. Step 3 is plan. Plan is where you create your weekly top 10 list. And the weekly top 10 is created by a process of dumping everything on the page to start with that you think that you would like to do, that you should do, that you have to do, that you'd like to create. Like the best weekly top 10 doesn't come from sitting down and going, okay, Marianne, I'm making my list. You have to do the brain dump first, because the brain dump is an opportunity. You might call it a mind map, whatever you want to call it. That is an opportunity for you to make sure that you're picking from the best actions, not just the first thing that you're writing down. If we make a list and we don't, any list at all, whether it's for the day, for the 90 days, the ladies are so used to me, right? If you're watching this and you've been at one of my retreats, really big pieces of paper, mind mapping, taking the time to do this step before we create any kind of plan is critical. And it's also going to clear the pipes and get you connected with what you really want to accomplish this week. This is your visioning, in a way, the brain dump. It is you starting to feel into, and now we're talking about like a jigsaw puzzle. You're putting all the pieces that could go into this week out on the table, and then you're going to pick the ones that actually fit instead of just writing down the first thing that comes to mind. So as we go through this brain dump, you can go through, if you have the planner, there's actually a little process that you can do where you can go through the different areas and start to think about 4 different questions. So, of course, my contacts are really making this. Okay, the first thing, 4 questions. So back to questions again, right? To help you with your brain dump. The first question is, if you could do anything this week, what would you do? Right? So throw out all of the obligation, throw out all of the deadlines, and the being a good productive person this week, right? Throw all of that out the window and start out by just asking yourself, if you could do anything this week, what would you do? Put that on the page and just give yourself a few minutes. You can pause this if you're listening to the replay, and you can go ahead and just really take a few minutes to dive into, if you could do anything this week, what would you do? This is another example of a question that could reveal something pretty remarkable. I've known people ask questions like this and then realize that they want to create a completely different product or service than the one they've been focused on, or that the business is heading in a completely wrong direction because it's not tied in with what they really want. That's not the objective here. The objective is to just allow whatever to come out and give you a space for you to not feel like you're in prison with your time and your activities. And then the next question is, where do you expect to be by the end of the week? So we, as I mentioned before, have these expectations that are there for everything. There is nobody that doesn't have any expectations about anything, right? We always have expectations. They might be silently in our head or unconscious, but we always have expectations. So I find it's much better to invite them out to contribute than to just ignore them and try and get them to just shut up, right? So be honest. Oftentimes what I'll write out personally on here, when I write down what do I expect to get done this week, most of the time it's completely unrealistic. And this is the step that's going to help me stop over promising and under delivering, and start under promising and over delivering. So be honest. The things you write on the page here, this is a brainstorm. This isn't your weekly top 10 list. It's you just getting everything out on the table so you can decide what's going to go on the weekly top 10 list. You're not committing to these things. Give yourself full permission to just put it down there. So where do you expect to be by the end of the week? And be really honest with yourself and just write down whatever comes to mind. The next question, what do you have to do this week? What agreements have you made? Are there deliverables or deadlines or things that feel immovable, that are big rocks? What's going on, right? So this might be things that you have to do for clients. So this might be things that you have This might be things you have to do for clients to deliver to them or to show up for appointments with clients. It might be with family, right? This is your whole week. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. This isn't just your business. This is your entire week, right? Your entire life, right? And then the fourth question, how can you create a winning environment today? And I want to pause and talk about this for just a second. A winning environment, a lot of people, and the easiest example is that, like, when you sit down, for example, at your desk, if the desk is cleared off and you have everything you need and you have the space to work, that's a winning physical environment, right? And so a lot of times people, and that's why people are drawn towards doing like organizing their desk, or some people, not a lot of my clients, but some people, I'm going to organize my inbox, or like you get caught up in these little things because you want to create some kind of control, because being a business owner is overwhelming and a lot of it you can't control. And so sometimes we will use this as an excuse for busy work, that we're just tidying things up, organizing things. When I'm talking about a winning environment, I think the best way to approach this is to look at, for example, your 90-day target or one of your projects for the next 90 days, and how can you make that even easier? What environments do you need to set up? What habits do you want to create that are going to make it even easier for you to do that? And some of it might be that you've got to get your head in the game and you have to listen to a certain thing before you start the day. Or it might be, if it was a personal goal, for example, and I was going to go to spin, which I did for several years at like 5 a.m. spin class. The night before, winning environment was, make sure I've got my spin shoes out, I've got my clothes out, I've got everything laid out ready, the alarm's set, right? It's this little ecosystem that I know if I set those things up, it makes it easier. If I'm like grabbing stuff out of the laundry and winging it and scrambling, I'm not going to get out the door in time to get to the class. Or if I do, it's stressful. A winning environment kind of smooths the path, and it might be physical, it might be mental, it might be a social environment that when you're in certain circles, things are easier, right? Start to think about what winning environments can you create this week. And honestly, the easiest way to decide which environments to upgrade or create is to notice which ones you're bumping up against. When something's difficult, look at the environment and see how you can make it easier by shifting something, moving something over. Like a great example of this, and one of my clients told me this was like up there with the top 5 things that she'd ever learned from me, was she was struggling to take her medication and forgetting to take it. And, her and I are working on her business and building her team and everything. But I always, I'm open to having coaching conversations around things that are causing challenges. And not taking medication was meaning that she wasn't feeling good, and that there were challenges that were showing up because of this. There was a ripple effect in her business because of this. And I simply said to her, how can we create a winning environment for this? And she wasn't quite sure. And then I said, well, when do you need to take it? She said, in the morning. And I said, do you brush your teeth? She said, yes. I said, put it next to your toothbrush. That's a winning environment. All we've done is just put this thing right in front of us so that we can't miss it. And instead of searching for things everywhere. Bringing me to now your weekly top 10. So you've done this brain dump. We went through the 4 questions to kind of do this mind map and dump all the things for the week. Now what you do is you look at that, and keeping in mind your 90-day plan and your 90-day targets and projects, you're gonna set a weekly top 10. That is the top 10 things that you are committed to accomplishing this week. Now, they might be all different sizes. You can be aware of that as you're writing them down. Some of them might be bigger, some of them might be smaller. They don't have to be equal sizes, which is why I do encourage you to have 10, because I find it very hard to believe that any business owner that wants to move forward doesn't have 10 things that they can write down. That 10 items, I would make sure that at least half of them are working on your business. What do I mean by that? If you're not sure, you want to head over to my website, getitdonediva.com, and click on the free training, the CEO Shift. I really dive into this. It's a great training regardless, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. But working on the business is where you're creating changes and infrastructure and plans and vision for the future. And then there's working in the business, which will be a maximum of 5 of the items on the weekly top 10. Working in the business is working with clients, doing admin work, doing the day-to-day stuff that's not actually going to change or create anything for the future, that's just keeping you where you are, like keeping the daily grind, you might call that, right? So you want to at least have 5 items, half of your weekly top 10, that's working on the business and half of it working in the business, and write them down. And then next to each item, I want you to think about, how long is this going to take me to do? And just ballpark it, and then maybe triple it, because we're really bad. We have time dysmorphia and we're not very good at guesstimating how long things take, especially if we haven't done it before. And so write down next to each item that, and just writing that down may cause you to go, that's a lot. Maybe I need to break this in smaller pieces. And that's why I say you can have 10 items on your weekly top 10, because if you chunk things down smaller, you're more likely to start them, which means you're more likely to finish them. So you're better off having 10 small items on a weekly top 10 than 3 or 4 big items. Is that making sense to you? I hope it is, because when we get really clear and specific, it's almost like we start with, when you say that my target is to write a book, it's overwhelming. This week I'm going to work on chapter 1. Okay. But if you write chapter 1 down to, I'm going to, into 3 items instead of 1 item on the list, and you make it that the first item is to outline and brainstorm what you want to include in chapter 1. And come up with a title, and then the second step is that you want to write out an outline, a more detailed outline of that chapter. And then step 3 is that you're going to polish and finish the chapter. That's going to be more doable, because when you look at it, you know what to do, as opposed to write first chapter, which is too big. I think a lot of the time what most people are doing is they're writing down weekly top 10 items or goals that are just too big and not clear and specific enough. And so this week, as you step into this week, keep in mind as well, we're just about to wrap up here, but I want to make sure that we keep this in mind, that this is week 6 of 12 weeks of your 90-day cycle. And so I want you to look, those of you, I hope you all have a 90-day roadmap. If you don't, I'm going to be teaching a masterclass like never before. Like, this is going to be a really great opportunity to work with me live. I'm developing it as a self-paced program. So I'm going to be taking people through it live to really get all the content together so that I can figure out exactly what this program is going to be. And so you're going to have this opportunity to go through it with me live and get more support than you ever would before. It's called the Business Freedom Formula, and you can sign up on my website, getitdonediva.com. I'll put the link in the description as well. And it's going to give you a chance over about 21 days that we're going to have masterclass sessions, and I'm going to walk you through everything you need to do from the beginning to create the best 90-day roadmap that you can. So if you don't have one, or you want to like make next quarters even better, make sure you sign up for that masterclass. I'm even throwing in a 90-day cohort. So once you've created your plan, we're going to work together, me and the first 25 ladies that sign up, we're going to be working on creating and implementing that plan throughout the next 90 days. So you're going to finish the year really strong. So if you haven't already, you can join the waitlist right now, getitdonediva.com, and make sure that you sign up so that when I do open the doors just for a couple days, first 25 ladies are going to get access to that program. Now, so you've got all of this stuff down on the page. You've got your weekly top 10. You've figured out how long each thing will take. You're keeping in mind how it fits in with your 90-day cycle that we're halfway through. So what do you need to do next to keep that in momentum as well? And then define a weekly target is the very last step here. Sometimes this comes sooner in the process, but for me, it's usually at the end. And I want you to think about, based on the list that you have there, what's the target? Like, how will you know that you've achieved what you wanted to achieve this last week? And it's interesting because sometimes it's something like, I'm growing my priority wait list right now. So it's the number of people on that list right now that have signed up and raised their hand and said, hey, yeah, I'm interested. So there's been some weeks where that has been my weekly target, a very specific metric. But then last week, I was really struggling. And so I realized halfway, about a third of the way through the week, that my mindset was the piece, and I needed to get in alignment, and I needed to make sure that I stayed in alignment. And so then my weekly target instead became alignment, being centered, being focused, like having my head in the game. That was more important than a metric, a number metric for the last week. So only you will know what's going to be the best target for you where you are right now in your business. So the last step, which we're not really going to dive into too much right now, but I just will mention it, and that is step 4, which is plug in. When you plug in, you're taking your weekly top 10, you're excited about it, you're jazzed about it, but if you don't plug it in and plug into it, then I can guarantee you in a day or two, you have completely forgotten about it. So what I want you to do is take the weekly top 10, and I want you to take those line items, and I want you to figure out when you're going to do them and plug it into your calendar. Make appointments with yourself, block off time. You don't have to specifically say, I'm going to do this in this time, but at least make sure that you have enough time blocks on your weekly calendar that match up with the total number of time that all of the tasks you think will take you that are on your weekly top 10. Because otherwise you're trying to fit, as my husband always loves to tell me, 5 pounds of potatoes in a 1 pound bag, right? You want to make sure that the list that you have fits into the week. And then you want to get your head in the game. So you want to make sure that your mindset, as I was just talking about, is so important. Otherwise you're just going through the motions and you'll probably end up redoing things anyway. So you want to make sure, maybe look at your power words, those of you that come to my annual retreats and do the annual process with me, or really make a list of the words of how you want to feel at the end of the week. Write those down and look at those every day to remind yourself that behind all of this list and everything you've written down here is this feeling that you want to create within yourself, a feeling of confidence, a feeling of clarity, a feeling of connection, a feeling of love, a feeling of impact or adventure, right? I don't know what your words are, but really tune into behind this weekly top 10 list, behind the desire to have the business, behind everything that you're doing is the desire to feel a certain way. So cut to the core of that and write down those words and really plug into those words and use them almost like a touchstone as you move through the week. So that's weekly momentum. Once again, we've got step 1 was rewind, step 2 is realign, step 3 is plan, step 4 is plug in. And I do one of these plan your week with me live about once a month. The rest of the time you can come through the process with me anytime you like. You can go over to my podcast, Weekly Momentum. There's, oh gosh, I've been doing a year now. There's like a full season. I'm about to go into a new season. I've got thousands of downloads. And so if you're all jazzed and you want to learn more about the process, go check out some of the podcasts. I do a different topic every week, but we do touch on the weekly momentum process as well. All that being said, I will let you know that you're going to have an amazing week. You're going to be plugged in, you're going to be aligned, you're going to be excited, and I'm really excited to see how you do. Maybe mention in the comments below what's your weekly target, or what's one of the weekly top 10 projects that you're most excited about, or once you achieve something or you have a win, make a comment in the comment below, because I'm right here, I'm cheering you on, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in momentum.